really like this story of linear human progression.
Yeah, and it's so wrong because human evolution is not linear at all. What are you going to do with Homo floresiensis, right? The Hobbit.
What is the Hobbit?
They found material on an island called Flores in Indonesia. Small brain, small size, big feet. The going hypothesis, and this is the one I support, this phenomenon called island dwarfing. What happens is large mammals shrink down and little mammals get bigger because there's no predators. So on this island, they have giant rats and baby stegodons.
Wow.
I really fight against this idea that evolution ends in us. And the fact of the matter is we haven't been here that long, and we probably won't be here that much longer.
I'm excited to chat with you. I listened to a few of your talks, specifically on North African teeth.
And the leaky one?
Oh,
I guess,
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And I just think your research and the work that you've done is really, really interesting. And I basically am just coming from like a very layperson point of view. Just educate me like a freshman in like your intro to pseudoscience class or something. But basically, I'm just curious in the story of human evolution and why teeth specifically are such an important part of that.
Oh, okay, great. Well, that's an easy one because teeth are, I mean, if you've listened to any of my things, you know that I've said the teeth are like fossils in your mouth, right? So teeth are 97% mineral in content, more or less. And what is a fossil? It's organic matter that has become mineralized, right? So teeth are basically mineral, so they preserve better than any other part of your body. If you also think about it, how many teeth do you have? 32 teeth. If you're some other animal, you're going to have even more teeth. So there's a lot of teeth in the fossil record. They preserve better than anything else, and they preserve really well over time. So you can look at teeth that are 300,000 years old, 400, 500,000 years old, and basically the white part, which is the tooth enamel, looks like yours or mine. Right?
So interesting.
Yeah. So it's really, and they also don't bone. Your long bones, your arms, your legs, your things, even your head is much more plastic. So what that means is that what you do, your behavior can affect your bone structure. Whereas teeth, once they form, a lot of them form while you're in utero, and then your wisdom teeth, your last tooth erupts when you're 18, right?
Right.
So after they form, nothing happens to them unless you get cavities, and they just are what they are. Whereas your bone can remodel, right? So people as they get older lose bone mass, right? You get osteoporosis. If you're a waiter and you're carrying a serving tray, you're going to have
greater bone density.
You'll have
see
differences between the right and the left. Do you know what I mean? So and if you grow up in certain climates, your head shape will be different than if you grow up in other kind of climates. So teeth really are a better representation of the underlying genome.
Right.
So
is there a male-female dynamic when it comes to bone structure? Like when it comes to like studying bones, obviously like people that have like XX or XY chromosomes might present different like bone densities. Does that make greater challenges when it comes to like comparing with teeth? Are teeth more consistent across those types of variables?
That's a really good question. And males and females don't differ that much in their teeth. Males might have slightly bigger canine teeth, the sharp pointing ones.
Right.
On average. But otherwise, and maybe they're on average or slightly larger, but
does that make the research easier? Because you're able to get greater samples. It does, because you just put them all in one pile.
Right.
Yeah. It doesn't. You're not having to now sort things through different lenses. It makes it a lot more linear. It seems like.
Yeah, exactly. And when you study skulls, you need to be like, okay, I'm going to compare all males, or I'm going to compare all females. Or if you're interested in differences between males and females, you better be sure that you've separated them correctly.
Right.
And sometimes that becomes problematic because maybe you're separating males and females into the robust ones are males and the less robust ones are females, and then you say, well, females are less robust than males, and maybe that's because you already sorted them that way.
Right? Interesting.
So there's always it's always good to have other parts of the body to reference. So the pelvis, you could imagine, right? Women have bigger hips than men. So the pelvis is really the best way to determine the sex of a skeleton.
Interesting.
So we always try to cross-check,
with as many different data points as you can.
Yeah.
Now, this might be tangential to like anthro at large, but I'm curious if you have researched or looked into this, but like the sugar revolution and how it's affected teeth. I've heard, I don't know necessarily if this is true, but I've heard that sort of like prehistory and like ancient Homo sapiens had better teeth than we have today.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the types of food they were eating, less sugar, things like that, and that post sort of like colonization, like industrialized sugar trade, all of a sudden teeth started getting worse, enamel was getting worse, our jawlines were getting worse. Do you have research or anything to speak to that?
I have experience.
That'll work too.
Absolutely. No, my research is mostly on, the evolution of the shape of teeth, but you can't help but notice differences in dental health when you look at skeletal material. And for my master's degree, my work was on a very bizarre tooth trait that was found on this tooth here, the lateral incisor, that looked basically like a Phillips head screwdriver. Called it the triform tooth. Anyway, so I looked at a lot of, and it was found in Native American groups, specifically from the Papago-Pima region, which is where near Arizona State University, where I got my PhD.
Oh, cool.
I was interested in whether that was characteristic of a particular linguistic group, the Uto-Aztecan speakers. But anyway, the point of that is I looked at a lot of Native American teeth, and what you see is that consistently when people adopt agriculture, not even necessarily sugar, but agriculture, particularly corn, and that's why I'm mentioning Native American teeth, your teeth go to hell in a handbasket, basically. So Neanderthals, maybe 5 I've come across of all the Neanderthals I've looked at, maybe 5 had itty bitty cavities that you had to find with a 10x hand lens. You're like, maybe there's a cavity there.
But virtually undetectable in Neanderthals.
Yeah. And anything before Neanderthals and Homo Sapiens until about 12,000 years ago when we start farming. And that's when you start seeing cavities more often, a lot more tooth wear, or like if you're fishing on a coastal area, right, then sand gets in your food and then your teeth wear down.
Oh, interesting.
And if your teeth wear down, then your pulp chamber gets exposed, and that causes abscesses because you're exposing the nerve to bacteria, and then that gets into your bloodstream and causes big problems. So like I could tell even with hunting gathering groups versus, let's say, corn agriculturalists, I mean, there's a just complete difference. You can tell somebody's diet just by looking at their dental pathology, at least in the Americas.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Wheat, not as much, and rice, not as much. Corn is but definitely there's an increase with any kind of agriculture, and then the frequency of cavities.
And what is it about corn? I understand corn, you can get like high fructose corn syrup. So I imagine there's
a
like
lot of sugar in corn.
I see.
Yeah. Corn and complex carbohydrates, basically a lot of sugar content. And corn also gets stuck between your teeth, right? To eat popcorn, later you're like,
yeah,
right? Or you bite onto a corn cob, it gets stuck in between your teeth, so it sticks around a long time, which then allows the bacteria to have a big party in your mouth. And when they party, they leave bacteria excrement, which is basically acid, and then that erodes your dental and your tooth enamel.
And the notion of oral hygiene at this point is probably not extremely prevalent.
Well, that's a really good question too, because I think that the earliest evidence we have now if you would include toothpick, would you include that as oral hygiene?
Yeah, I guess that would probably be the earliest version.
Yeah,
right?
so we have toothpick grooves in early Homo, like 1.5 million years ago, at least one individual, and then Neanderthals were doing that quite a bit. I can think of a number of Neanderthal specimens where you have, from habitual, not toothpicks like you get at the
but some type of like thin stick that they're using to try to remove
some kind of reed. And I had a colleague who actually had her graduate students simulate this. I think they took a jaw, probably a cadaveric jaw, that was donated, and then used a reed and just kept putting it in between the teeth to see how long it would take. And it took less time than you would think to create a toothpick groove. And then you can look at it under scanning electron microscopy, and then you can actually see the action of because it leaves a mark in the directionality of the reed. So it's actually pretty cool. Oh,
that's so interesting.
See, teeth are cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, I am fascinated. I've also, there's this big trend right now with men specifically trying to, build a more robust mandible. Have you seen this?
No.
This is a fascinating trend. Don't roll your eyes. This is serious, okay? Men need to work on this. But basically, there's this prevailing theory that prior to, again, Industrial Revolution, maybe men, specifically probably like hunter-gatherer groups, like people were eating tougher foods.
Yes.
They were eating meat, like especially in hunter-gatherer groups, like you're probably eating like really tough meat. It's been cooked to hell, or you're, you know, trying to like rip it off of like a bone or something like that. And as a result, you're developing more jaw muscles. It's creating a wider mandible. Your teeth are able to fit in a more sort of like succinct pattern. The idea of like an orthodontist wasn't as important because teeth knew what to do on sort of our hunter-gatherer diet. Is there any evidence to support that, both in your research or research you've heard about?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you look at people prior to agriculture, or you can even look at Aboriginal people from various areas of the world before and after being introduced to a Western diet. The Western diet just kills everything. I mean, you get cavities, abscesses, and because we're eating soft foods and you're not using your jaw, then your jaw doesn't develop enough room for your teeth to erupt, and then you get impacted wisdom teeth, and then over time, you can imagine that impacted wisdom teeth can cause big problems, right? You can get abscesses, right? So people who, by chance, are missing some might survive better, right? So then you have in certain populations, there's a higher frequency of not having your wisdom teeth, right? Just they never form, right? But that isn't across the globe, right? There's plenty of people who have a history of a non-agricultural past who have big old jaws with plenty of room for their teeth, and they don't have problems erupting their third molars or the wisdom teeth. So, you know, when people in my class ask me, like, are we losing our wisdom teeth? I'm like, well, who are you talking about by we? Like Europeans? Yeah, okay, there's been selection probably because we have teeny tiny jaws because we're eating gruel and there's no, you know, but the thing is, I'm not really sure how much you can do after you're a certain age, right? Because your teeth are already, right, by the time you're 18, your wisdom teeth are formed, right? So you can maybe, you could keep, the best thing to do, like, okay, you need to have like mothers giving their children sticks to chew on, right? When they're young and developing their jaws, right? After you're, you know, a college student, I'm not sure there's that much you can do.
Right, like post-puberty roughly, like it's going to be more difficult to change those things.
Developing all your teeth, yeah. So your third molar is erupting at 18. It's probably crown complete. Sorry, I'm using boring nerdy stuff. Crown complete around whatever 14 or 15 years of age. So
interesting. So there might not be much to do.
The thing is, what happens though, like people who don't take care of their teeth and then they lose their teeth, right? I mean, I remember growing up in small town Pennsylvania, and I had a friend who was just like, I can't wait to lose all my teeth, and I'm just going to get dentures. It's so much easier, right? But the thing is if you don't have teeth, your jawbone just, you know, the people who don't have teeth, their jaws are jutting forward, like, you know, they have this.
You lose your whole facial shape.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, the structure of your face changes dramatically.
The best thing you can do is keep your teeth.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think people, just on a personal level, should be like changing diet or at least be aware of these things, that we've sort of left some of these heirlooms of, you know, the human development behind with this new Western diet?
I don't know. I try not to be judgy about that because I think that, you know, what's normal changes and is different for everybody. So my ancestors from Holland are milk and cheese producers, right? So we have a high frequency of people being able to digest milk, but the rest of the world, 67% of the population is lactose intolerant, right? Because most people, you know, don't have the history of dairy farming, right? So to say that one diet is good for everybody is absolutely ridiculous. Right. So for me, milk is great. My ancestors had milk. We ate milk and cheese, but for people who, let's say from West Africa, who don't have a dairy farming background, or from East Asia, and you give them milk and they have gas and bloating and diarrhea,
inflammation of all sorts.
Right. So that's not good. Milk's not good.
That makes sense.
The dairy industry doesn't want you to know that, but it's not, milk isn't good for everybody.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And do you know what the percentage of lactose intolerance in like Dutch people and on average is? Is it significantly lower than the global average?
I think I'd have to, you know, Google it, but you know, but I mean, in general, you know, people who have a history of dairy farming have a high frequency of lactose tolerance, and those who don't. So there's a group in East Africa who are dairy. They do have cows, they're cattle herders. And within Africa, they're the group that can digest milk, right? So there's and they've also identified different mutations. I can't remember exactly how many. I'd say at least 3, maybe more, different mutations for being lactose tolerant. So that when it happens, if you're a dairy farmer, that's a good thing, right? If it happens, if you have the mutation to digest cow's milk and your people don't have cows, who cares?
Interesting. Yeah. It
doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it's going to be in low frequency because there's no selection increasing the frequency of it.
That's so interesting. I wonder if elements like pasteurization make a difference with that. Where
that's like, going down a realm I don't know.
Yeah, so. I'm just so curious. I wonder if there's any research on like cultural dairy farmers and their ability to sort of process enzymes in non-pasteurized milk.
Yeah,
and that if pasteurization was an attempt to sort of like equal the playing field in a sense that like it sort of like took out some of the things that maybe more people could consume it on average.
Yeah, I don't know, because I thought pasteurization was to get rid of bacteria.
Right. That's how I understand it to be. But I wonder if there's like some type of like immune response that's developed over time in dairy farming cultures.
Yeah, I don't know. But did you know that they put vitamin D in milk? Like milk doesn't have vitamin D naturally.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, that's to prevent rickets.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's all fortified.
When was that introduced? Do you know?
I don't know. I would say early 1900s probably.
Oh, interesting.
And this is probably on the list of things that you wanted to talk about. But so when people, if you're not exposed to enough sunlight, then you can't synthesize vitamin D, and vitamin D is important for maintaining the rigidity of your bones. And if you don't have that, you develop something called rickets. So basically, gravity takes over, and your legs are kind of bowed, but it also messes up your pelvis as well, which can then directly translate into reproductive fitness. Because if your pelvis is messed up, you're going to have trouble having babies, right? So, in order to prevent rickets, vitamin D, at least in the U.S., I don't know if it started in the U.S. I never went that far into looking into it, but
sure.
That's why they do that, to prevent rickets.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny.
Yeah,
these things like milk's so good for you because of the stuff they put into it.
Yeah, just take a vitamin D supplement. You're gonna be okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good. Don't drink milk. I actually don't drink milk, even though
you're the only one that's allowed.
My people.
You're the only one that's allowed to drink milk.
But I don't like it. I'm like,
you have to do it for us, okay? For me, I can't drink milk. All right.
Are you lactose intolerant?
I think so. Yeah. Self-diagnosed through many trial and error.
Okay. Okay. Well, no, my daughter just was diagnosed with at least sensitivity, and I'm like, you can't be, you're Dutch.
But is her dad Dutch?
No, he's Eastern European, so maybe that's what it is.
These Slovenians, they don't have any cows.
That's right, Slovenian. How did you know?
Nice. That was a good guess, right?
Okay,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
See, I think comedians, we're just good at intuiting.
I guess that's what it is.
Yeah, that's what it is. But I'm so curious about the origin of humans existing on the planet. So I know there's probably some debate about like some of the questions that I'm going to kind of go through. Okay. So you can feel free to like put disclaimers as far as like what's disputed.
Okay.
But as far as like the earliest known Homo sapiens, roughly what year and what region of the world do we have evidence that they existed?
Okay, so far the earliest evidence is from North Africa about 300,000 years ago. And those early Homo sapiens have skulls that are kind of archaic looking, meaning kind of slopey, not as globular. Like you and I have this kind of, skull.
I have a Neanderthal skull. I don't know if you know that. Have you seen my brow? Look at this.
Oh, that's nothing. I'll have to show you a picture of us. I've been on some shows, and when I haven't been on in a while, but I would know when the History Channel was showing this one because people would email me like pictures of themselves being like, I think I'm part Neanderthal. And I have this guy. He's the biggest brow ridges I've ever seen in my life. I mean, they're like huge, but his face is really flat and he's got this really nice chin. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're not a Neanderthal. You got to and you have a very nice chin too. So you might have big brow ridges, but that's okay because early Homo sapiens had big brow ridges. But we have this basketball shaped head. But these early Homo sapiens are still kind of archaic looking in aspects of their skull, but their teeth are completely modern. modern, in that when you plot them in a graph, they fall with all the Homo sapiens, right, as opposed to other groups. So
Interesting.
And there's a couple other features too. So there's a a misconception, I think, that people have, that when our species evolved, we evolved to look, I don't know, like something, and everybody has a different idea of what that would look like, right? Like, I don't know, probably they think that they look like Europeans or something. But the thing is, there's a lot of variation in the way Homo sapiens around the world look. And there are some Homo sapiens that have bigger brow ridges and slopier foreheads, and there's ones that have flatter faces and less flat faces, and you know what I mean? So there's really no one. It's very difficult to define what makes us Homo sapiens, and mostly it's this thing here, right here is our chin. So this is the one thing that we have that is only found in the Homo sapiens.
Interesting. Okay, so what would classify us as Homo sapiens and not some other thing?
That chin.
And what about this chin?
Oh, so in non-modern humans, the how do I describe it? It just kind of slopes back, whereas ours has an indentation here, right? I mean, it's
like
the mental
knob.
Eminence, because when you were thinking, right? So there's kind of this. It juts out, and there you have two kind of indentations, and then if you really look at it closely, there's kind of an upside down T shape, an inverted or a triangle, or an inverted T, and then on either side there's these depressions, and that's what makes a modern chin.
Interesting.
So,
and that is the greatest delineator between Homo sapiens and Homo erectus, Neanderthals, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, because Neanderthals had big brains, and some early Homo sapiens had big brow ridges, and some early Homo sapiens had kind of archaic looking skulls, but we all have, Homo sapiens has the chin. So it's really not that exciting, the thing that makes us human. And so far, it's the chin. It's the one thing that every Homo sapiens on the planet has a chin.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And
a particular type of chin.
300,000 years ago is when people are estimating that those fragments existed in a living Homo sapien with brains the same as ours.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
and then,
fascinating. 300,000 years ago.
Yeah, but Neanderthals had bigger brains than we did.
Right.
So,
and they were coexisting with Homo sapiens at the same time.
Yeah. So it could have been some kind of convergent evolution, some selection was going on or their common ancestor also had a big brain. That's also possible. But and then 200,000 years ago, there's some clearly Homo sapiens in Greece. And then 100,000 years ago, there's clearly Homo sapiens in the Near East. So, but yeah, so far, and 160, there's some in East Africa. So far, it seems that, I mean, the thing is I hesitate because the earliest ones are 300,000 years old in North Africa as of July 7th, 2023, doesn't mean that in July 7th, 2024, we're not going to find something that's older or in somewhere else.
Sure,
and this
exactly.
is the beauty of science, and the fun thing, the thing that makes paleoanthropology fun, is actually knowing that everything can change next year.
Yeah, it is wild.
Well, not everything, but I mean, it's tweaked. Things get tweaked.
Because there was a time, I'm sure, I mean, maybe even when you were in your undergrad or getting your PhD, that the date of recorded Homo sapiens was probably more recent. Maybe they found,
it was the earliest Homo sapiens in the Near East had been dated to about 50,000, and then they were redated to older, and then redated again, so they're between 90 and 100,000 years old.
What's up, guys? We're gonna take a break really quick because your back hurts. Yeah. You got this thick, lumpy dad wallet sitting in your back right pocket right now as you're listening to this. And all of a sudden it just clicked. Oh, that's why my back looks like the letter S. Yeah, my back used to hurt. I used to have this thick old wallet. I also used to be carrying the group chat with my jokes. Hurt my back a lot. But now I use Extra. Now, this is an awesome product, and I'm so excited to talk about it because this is a product that I genuinely use every single day. This is my actual wallet. Don't look at the card number. This is my actual wallet. As you can see, with one little push of a button, all my cards flare out. Everything that I need is easy to access. I got my credit card, got my debit card, got my ID, got my library card, got my condoms. I got everything I need in this little wallet right here. So what I love about this is a few things. One, You're never going to lose it. You can get the additional tracker that goes on the back of your extra wallet, and you can find your wallet anywhere in the world. That's right. Just use your Google Home, use Siri to be like, hey, Alexa, where's my wallet? It'll tell you exactly where it is. What I like about Extra as well is that it's RFID protected. That means all these scammers that are walking up behind you trying to scan your back pocket to steal your credit card information, they can't do it with this. Nope, this is a case of protection. This is as secure as it can be. This is Fort Knox for all of your financial products. And the last thing that I love about Extra that not a lot of people are going to talk about, but I think is the most important thing, it doesn't let you accumulate junk. Every wallet I've ever had, someone will give me a business card and I throw it in my wallet. I don't even think about it. Someone will give me a receipt. I go to CVS. I get a 12-page receipt, put it in my wallet. I have all of these things in my wallet that I don't need. And with Extra, I don't need them. I throw them away. I process the things I need. If I got my little money clip, I could throw my money on the side. I can do that, but I don't. I like to keep it simple and I like to keep it sleek. And I like Extra because it is the largest smart wallet brand in the world. So if you're interested in joining the Extra gang, just like your boy, you can check out the wallets at shop.extra.com/Gagnon. That is shop, shop.extra, EKSTER.com/Gagnon, Gagnon. And if you use the code Gagnon, you can get up to 25% off the entire site. That is correct. You can buy a wallet for you, your dad, your brother, your mom, your dog. Add them all up. Christmas time comes around and you can hook up the whole family. If you want to do that, that's shop.extra.com/Gagnon and use the code Gagnon to get up to 25% off. I'm telling you, this will protect your credit cards. It'll save your back, and it will make you throw away all those dumb CVS receipts that you don't need. Now let's get back to the show.
And is there sort of an accepted anthropological explanation for why us as a species sort of evolved this consciousness, this brain that we have now in some time, and why we deviated from a common ancestor? Is there, I know this is probably a big question, but is there any sort of like theories that people have put out that you seem to resonate with?
That's a tough one because for a lot of reasons. So it gets kind of complicated. So how do we judge what's modern? Right. And not, so like if you look at humans, what they were doing 200 years ago compared to what we're doing now. Right, computers. I mean, when I was a kid, the idea of carrying a computer around with you, crazy stuff.
In 20
years, you're like, no way.
Yeah,
right.
20 years is crazy.
Right, so like somebody in the future might look at our technology now, and then some humans 200 years ago driving around Model Ts or not even having cars or whatever, and be like, oh, they must be completely different in there. They must, where do we get all this smartness 200 years later? What happened? Right. So it's really hard, I think, to separate that kind of thing and ability. Do you know what I mean?
Interesting.
So like that said, and so this is a really big debate because there are a lot of my colleagues who would be like, Neanderthals are as smart as us and they're just as intelligent and just as creative and they did art and maybe we learned art from them and maybe we learned modernity from them, right? So there's a decent number of people who I respect very much who have that view. Because there are some Neanderthals that are found 130,000 years ago using like talons from eagles as pendant, jewelry, or using ochre to maybe decorate their bodies, or possibly doing cave art, right? But when you look at Neanderthals as a whole for the 300,000 years that they are on the earth, there's like 4 or 5 instances, right, of that.
Fairly
Whereas
rare.
when you look at modern humans, Homo Sapiens, it's like, it does feel different, I guess, to me. So I guess I'm not really answering your question because I don't know what would have brought it about. And it could be population size. Some people have speculated that greater population size allows for greater interaction between people so ideas could get exchanged, right? So imagine you're a Neanderthal and you're born and you're like super smart. and you're like, I'm gonna make me some art, and your pals are like, what are you wasting time doing that for, right? We need to be hunting, and you're making, necklaces. Why?
Yeah.
Right? And so nobody really appreciates you, and you're sparse on the landscape. So there's a couple here, and then maybe a couple miles away there's, or miles and miles away. So it's not like you're exchanging ideas with people. So then there's nobody to appreciate you, right? Whereas you increase the population size, now, Dorg comes up with something, and maybe his people don't appreciate him, but he trades it with somebody. They're like, this is cool, we're going to do it too. And they build on it, and they change it, because that's what technology is, right? It's building on other people's ideas, reusing it for your own purpose, novelty, right? So that's the way I think of it.
Interesting.
But
perhaps Homo sapiens have like a higher degree of agreeability or a curiosity, perhaps.
maybe. Yeah. And
Interesting.
maybe. And the thing is, it's one of those things that I don't know how you would test.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't really, I'll talk about it in class, and I'll throw these ideas about genus Neanderthals around just because I think it's kind of funny. And I like to imagine that there were really smart Neanderthals out there. But I wouldn't say that all Neanderthals as a species had the same abilities that we did. But I certainly think that that could arise, and maybe in some groups it died out, and it, they didn't have the population size. So anyway, but yes, it's not really a testable hypothesis. All you can do is say, and this is a study I've been wanting to do, and maybe I will in my retirement, is to actually document all the Neanderthal sites out there, and then it's actually very simple to do, and what percentage actually have anything that looks like art or symbolism, and then take all the early Homo sapiens sites, and what percentage have some degree of symbolism, right? So you could do something relatively simple and be like, well, gee, all of these Neanderthal sites, and there's like 5 instances of something that we can definitely say looks creative and modern, and then it's like 80% of that would tell me something. I think that's significant, but that's me.
Right. So. Yeah, that would be interesting just to see the sort of like percentile variability between groups.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what exactly is Homo erectus? I've heard this term a lot. Is that sort of like a different substrata of like bipedal primate type?
Yeah. So when I was an undergraduate, there was, I don't know, 4 or 5 species of humans, and now there's, I don't know, a lot more. Let's say triple that.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
So Homo erectus is one branch of the human evolutionary tree. Probably some population of Homo erectus evolved into Neanderthals, and perhaps some other population of Homo erectus evolved into Homo sapiens, or perhaps something after Homo erectus, let's say archaic Homo sapiens, or some archaic group that's not Homo erectus, maybe the common ancestor for Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. So we don't know at this point exactly where. I mean, the genetic evidence suggests maybe around 700,000 years ago, this split occurred with DNA, right, between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. The earliest pre-Neanderthals we have are about 400,000 years old, and the earliest Homo sapiens we have are about 300,000 years old. So you could have a divergence in DNA before you have a shape, you know what I mean, a recognizable skeletal difference.
Interesting.
So Homo erectus is before that, but Homo erectus also lived for a long period of time. So the oldest are, and it changes all the time. Let's just say 1.8 million years, maybe 1.9, probably Dmanisi 1.9, and then they existed until maybe 100,000 years ago. So they in the late in East Asia. So it's very possible that they also could have been at the same time as Denisovans and Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, right? So you get this whole, and then with Homo naledi now and another species and Homo floresiensis, you've got this possibility that when our species was running around, not just Neanderthals, but there might have been several other human species running around as well.
That is so fascinating.
Right.
The idea that on Earth all at once, and maybe they never had any contact with each other, right?
Yeah, it's hard
because
to know.
if they're all in different parts of the globe,
Right.
but there could be a chance that 5 different species of humans, quote
Right.
unquote, are interacting.
Right.
And the physical differences are less interesting to me than the cognition. And I'm just curious. I don't know. Again, I don't know if there's an answer to this, but in the field, is there a consensus on, if there was a Neanderthal sitting across from us right here, do you think it'd be possible that they would have the understanding of complex language, that they could understand the words that we're saying now? Or, what was the other one you said?
Denisovans.
Denisovans. Yeah, I've heard that one too.
Yeah.
That's a cool one.
Well, I mean, that's kind. I mean, think about the question, right? What do you mean, English?
Yeah, could they learn some type of...
Could they learn it?
Yeah. Do they have the vocal cords in order to communicate the sound?
Okay, so...
Things like that.
People like Philip Lieberman and other colleagues have studied the vocal tract, the shape of the tongue, the placement of the larynx, in as much as you can do that. That's soft tissue. It does not preserve in the fossil record. You have to kind of predict based on the shape of the base of the skull, let's say, and the height of the vertebrae, the cervical vertebrae. And they have and people have tried to look at it in a number of ways, neural canals, and they have suggested that Neanderthals would not have been able to make all the vowels that humans make. I don't think that means anything in terms of language,
right?
Honestly, and I think that for whatever kind of smarts Neanderthals had, I have no problem with them having a language. They were making complex stone tools that required people like Dietrich Stout and other people who do these kind of studies in the lab with putting electrodes on you to see what part of your brain is firing when you're making tools and stuff. They have found that even Homo erectus, you had to be thinking ahead about what they were going to do with this rock. It wasn't a matter of knocking a flake off and just using it, which is what earlier humans did. But Homo erectus made these beautiful, among other things, many other things. But the thing that gets the most attention are these things called hand axes. And they're all pretty much shaped a very similar way in kind of a pear shape. They're flaked on both sides. Really, I mean, you just look at them and you can appreciate that they're pretty, and they take... You have to know how to flake rock. You have to know what kind of rock to choose. That has to get transmitted through generations, maybe taught. Maybe with Homo, I mean, my colleagues, some of my colleagues have suggested with Homo erectus, I would say at least definitely with Neanderthals, the way that they would take a rock and prepare it. They would flake it around the top, flake it around the edges, then flip it up like this and knock it off here, and you get a Levallois point, right? I mean, that's not shit. You just
yeah. There's
and they've done
lot.
studies like how long does it take if you just watch somebody versus get verbal instruction, and it takes you can learn it just by watching, but it takes a long time.
Yeah.
So I have no problem with at least Neanderthals having some form of language, a form of communication, at least at that level, to be able to convey. I don't know if they could talk about future and the past and stuff like that, but I think they could preconceive a shape that they wanted, have an idea of why they might want to do it, and teach it to other people in their group. Right.
Yeah. I mean, just the development of technology, the preservation of the technology through some type of oral tradition. And then did you say on the hand axes, there's almost like an ornamentation to it? Like there is like a artistic element, or is it all...
Some people would say, the thing is, some of these things are this big and they're not used at all. There's no use wear on them. So we don't know what they were for. Some people would suggest that they were, I've got a big hand axe. You know what I mean? Yeah. Come on, baby, and see my hand axe tonight, kind of thing. Because there's plenty of them that are really big, have no use wear on them at all. And I don't really go into that whole thing because, again, that's speculation, and I try to focus on things I can test. Mm-hmm. But there's a Neanderthal, there's a hand axe, because Neanderthals also made hand axes, and there's one that I can't remember what site it's from, but it's definitely associated with other Neanderthal tools, Mousterian tools, and it's got a beautiful little shell right in the middle. So the person chose this piece of material, flaked all around, and preserved that shell. For why would you do that unless you can appreciate some degree of aesthetics? But again, that could have been the genius Neanderthal. And everybody's like, what are you doing that for, dog?
Right. It might have just been a one-off. It might not be super prevalent throughout the Neanderthal.
Right. Different Neanderthal populations may have evolved different things, right?
Right. Yeah. It'd be difficult to look at LeBron James's fossil record and be like, Homo sapiens could all dunk and they were 7 feet tall.
Right,
and
exactly.
Yeah, they were all freak athletes.
No, that's good example.
I'm also here.
Right. So
Right.
we're not all capable of the same thing. So
Right.
So I don't know. That's a long answer to your question of whether a Neanderthal could sit here and have a conversation with you. I don't know. It depends on what you're going to talk about. If you're going to talk about how do you make that tool, I make it like this. Yes, they could probably talk. If you're going to be like, what do you think about the current political campaign? They might be like,
Yeah. If we're talking about food or reproduction, then we could probably have a good. That's pretty much all I talk about anyway. So maybe me and him would be best friends.
Is what I'm saying.
Maybe me and him would be best friends. That is so interesting. And is there a accepted scientific framework? And again, this might venture. Anthropology is difficult because I understand it's so multidisciplinary. But is there a common accepted scientific framework for understanding intelligence amongst sort of all living things, but specifically within human species? Is there an idea of like, being able to pass on information, being able to create art? Are there different sort of classifications for understanding like, this is intelligence and this is sort of still animalistic?
I don't think that's something we really get into. I mean, I would say that all human groups produce art, you know, and tools, and have language, right? All living human groups have some form of symbolic thought. And so that's why this is one of the things that we focus on, right? What does it mean to be modern? Well, symbolic thought. Okay, well, what about this Neanderthal that made that hand axe? Well, is that symbolic thought? And if you say yes, then they say, okay, well, then Neanderthals are modern. Right, so that's the argument. That's the thing that people just go over and over and over again.
Oh, interesting.
So you have to ask yourself, well, is one enough? Is five enough? 5 incidences of maybe Neanderthals doing this, and here's the whole thing the thing that throws a wrench into this whole conversation is that if Homo sapiens evolved 300,000 years ago in North Africa, and then they're in Greece at 200,000 years ago, and they're in the Near East at 100,000 years ago, and they're using Neanderthal tools. They don't start making modern tools until 50,000 years ago. Then how do we know that all those sites that we're calling Neanderthal sites were actually made by Neanderthals, right? So we assume that also Neanderthals make tools called Mousterian tools, right? Homo sapiens made Mousterian tools in Africa and in the Near East up until a certain time period. Around 50,000 years ago, they start making the Achmarian and Neronian and things that have little tiny blades, and they're very different. They're recognizably different. And so we're assuming that when we find Mousterian tools in Europe, that only Neanderthals made them. And it's probably a good assumption until it's not. Do you know what I mean? So let's say that beautiful hand axe that is associated with Mousterian tools, there's no fossils there. So I'm saying a Neanderthal made that because it's associated with other Mousterian tools. Right. But if it dates to 100,000 years ago, right? So
there's a lot of people here 100,000 years ago.
And I think that's maybe going out on a limb, and maybe being a little bit too speculative, but that's always the case until you find evidence to support it.
Yeah.
Right?
So, I mean, it must be so difficult, especially within the field of anthropology, because throughout all of even just Homo sapiens existence, let's say that is, however 300,000 years, I would say researchers are probably working with 5% of all Homo sapien, like fossil record, data, technology, maybe even less. Like what percentage would you put it on as far as like what's able to be...
Like what percent of what's out there have we found?
Yeah, or that can even be found in terms of like understanding the human story.
Don Johansson likes to say that human fossils are more rare than diamonds. That's about all I can tell you. So if you consider about what we found, it's some very tiny percentage of what was out there.
Yeah.
And so we make the assumption that what we find represents the average, right? Because you're going to find more in that, if you imagine a bell curve, most of the things are going to be in the middle, right? That said, there's evidence of a Paleolithic achondroplastic dwarf that dates to about 14,000 years ago. That's a very rare condition. and yet it is preserved in the fossil record. So, you know what I mean? Like, we do make the assumption that what we find represents the average, but that's not to say that once in a while you don't get some that are out in the, you know, point whatever.
And
I mean, but we have to go with you just can't. It just gets very speculative when you start diving into like what could be. Okay, well, there's a lot of things that could be.
Yeah, exactly. And it's difficult to know that, is this hyper advanced technology even for the species, or is this part of the middle of the bell curve, like you were saying?
Right.
And you have to try to make some type of deduction,
right?
I guess by like maybe other fossil records and say like, we found 5 or 6 of these types of things, so it must have been relatively common.
Right. And I think that like the more, because let's say in the past 10 years, there have been, people are finding more things that might represent art that are associated with Mousterian tools, right? I would have said Neanderthals, but let's just say Mousterian tools because that's more accurate because they're not associated with fossils.
Right.
So, there's this cave art in Portugal, and they're like, well, it's 60,000 years old, and Homo sapiens weren't there yet, and therefore it must be made by Neanderthals. I'm like, maybe. Because we know that modern humans, there were several, let's say, attempts out of Africa to colonize, and it wasn't until about 50,000 years ago that they were actually very successful, right? So you find some modern humans in Greece at 200,000 years ago. There's some in the Middle East 100,000 years ago, and then afterwards it's Neanderthals. So there's moderns, and then there's Neanderthals afterwards, right? So it's not until 50,000 years ago that you get moderns, and then modern, and the Neanderthals start shrinking back, and they disappear within 5,000 years.
We really like this story of linear human progression.
Yeah, and it's so wrong.
It's very seductive to be like, there was Homo erectus, and they were stupid, and then Neanderthals were a little smarter, and then there's Homo sapiens, and we're the smartest.
Yes.
And then everywhere we went, we just propagated and had children and built farms, and that was human history.
And we need to fight that, because human evolution is not linear at all. There's so many experiments at being something that didn't go anywhere, and branches of trees that are dead ends, and what are you going to do with Homo naledi and Homo floresiensis, right? The Hobbit, aka the Hobbit, right?
What is the Hobbit?
Oh, you don't know?
I've never heard of this.
Oh, that was in 2004. They found material on an island called Flores in Indonesia, near Yogyakarta, and I remember because I ran into Chris Stringer, who's at the Natural History Museum in London, and we were at a conference, and he's like, hey, come here. I just reviewed this article on this thing. It's 3 feet tall, and it's got the brain the size of a grapefruit, and it's only 19,000 years old. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. What? And he's like, yeah, don't tell anybody. I'm like, all right. So, and then it came out like the next week, and we were just all aflutter, because how could you have something that looked like Lucy, on Australopithecus in some ways, small brain, small size, aspects of their how they walked and their big feet, right? And that's why they called it the Hobbit, because it had this big feet, right? And it's close to New Zealand, right?
Oh wow!
Not really close to New Zealand, but it's over in that area of the world. Anyway, so they originally thought they were living up till 13,000 years ago. Now the dating, they've gone back and redated them to something like 90,000 years ago, but still around the same time that Homo sapiens was. But they're a complete side branch of, right. So they didn't go anywhere. So they're in fact is disproving linear evolution, because that's an extinct side branch. So
that's so interesting. And do we know anything about them? What is the name of them, the scientific
Homo
name?
floresiensis, from Flores.
Homo floresiensis.
Yeah, floresiensis. So,
and do we know anything about how long they persisted on Earth?
So there's a site where they found stone tools that is on the same island, but a different site that they think might have been made by Floresiensis, and it's 850,000 years old. And then they found some fossils associated, Menge, I think it's the same site. And they look a little bit like Homo floresiensis might look 800,000 years ago. So the going hypothesis, and this is the one I support, of course there's some people who have a different interpretation, is that Homo erectus, which was there in the area, we know there's Homo erectus in Indonesia, got out to this island, and then what happened is you got this phenomenon called island dwarfing. So I don't know if you've ever seen dwarfed hippos or dwarfed elephants, and so weird shit happens when you go on an island because there's very few resources, and so what happens is large mammals shrink down, and little mammals get bigger because there's no predators, right? So on this island they have giant rats. These guys were hunting giant rats and baby stegodons, and stegodon's like an elephant, right? So a baby stegodon would have been teeny, right? And even the dwarfed stegodons were, I don't know, like maybe this high or something like that. So, right? I know it's funky, but it happens you see it all. I mean, you can observe this phenomena happening. And with the Floresiensis, there was some argument because their brains are like seriously like the size of a chimpanzee. It's like 380, maybe 400 cubic centimeters, the size of a grapefruit. And that's really small, even for Homo erectus. Homo erectus had brains that are like 800, like half the size of ours. But some people have shown that that it is possible, like the brain doesn't shrink down in a really necessarily predictable linear way. So you can shrink the body to here, and the brain might get relatively smaller. Brain uses a lot of energy, right? And so there could be selection for a smaller brain, less that lowers your metabolic rate.
Right. So as resources are scarce, a smaller brain might become advantageous.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is so interesting.
So,
and they were roughly how tall?
3.5 feet tall. Yeah, I remember when my daughter was 3.5 feet tall, I brought her into my class, and I was like, this tall. This is how tall they were. And people were like, what?
That's so funny. Were they hairy? Do we know?
We don't know.
Not your daughter, but the Floriensis.
We don't know. Yeah, we don't know.
Is...
We can't. All that soft tissue stuff, like when how hairy were Neanderthals, we just can't.
But they told me dinosaurs had feathers, so I believe
some did.
I believe
Not
them.
All, but some. Yeah.
I mean, this is just that is
thermoregulation, though, not for flight necessarily in the beginning.
Oh, right. Yeah. Interesting.
No, it is cool.
That is so fascinating.
Right.
And they were. Do they have civilizations? Are they doing agriculture?
Dinosaurs? No.
I wish they were. I would love to see a T-Rex farm.
Yeah. No,
they can't farm with those little arms though.
No,
it must be so hard.
No, they didn't. They were hunting baby stegodon and giant rats. And
do we have tools from them?
That's a tricky thing. Yeah, there's some tools. The whole what's associated with what gets kind of tricky. In the beginning they said they were associated with fire, but then it turns out that was from a different level, because in actuality that whole area is very geologically active, and it's not like you find nice layers and skeletons laid out. So sometimes in fact, my understanding is that they were found on a slope, and so it's a little tricky to know what's associated with what.
That is so interesting.
So, and then Homo naledi was discovered, and that's a new species from southern Africa that also has a small brain, a little bit taller, though, and doesn't look like Homo floresiensis at all. Dentally, doesn't look like Homo floresiensis, but looks like Homo floresiensis. Like from here down has some really early hominin traits, whereas the skull is like a shrunken down Homo erectus skull. And the teeth are small, and actually some of them are very modern looking. And then this tooth down here is just like nothing I've ever seen before. I don't know why. And there's more than one, so I know it wasn't just a pathological individual. So, and Homo naledi, I say that because Homo naledi has different teeth. So they're not the same thing at all. And Homo naledi is probably 200,000 to 300,000 years old. So again, living at the same time that our species would have been existing.
Oh, interesting.
And both of these species look like they were still hanging out, I would say, or spent some considerable amount of time in trees, not just being bipedal.
Okay, this is so fun. Have you looked at any teeth of Homo floriensis?
Yeah, I went there. Yeah.
Itty bitty.
They're well, they're like the size of modern humans, and they're small, like in the sense that they're like this. They're about the same size as modern Indonesian teeth, which are small. Do you know what I mean? They're not teeny tiny.
Right.
But they're not. And the molars are very simple, and so, in fact, like Homo sapiens. But this one premolar, the premolars, your bicuspids, don't look like Homo sapiens at all. it's a very strange thing. They've got 3 roots. I mean, like it's a very weird thing that even I'm like, I don't have an explanation for that, why it looks like that. And like I said, that's why they need to find more material, because there's nothing that looks like that. Like we can't link it to anything.
Yeah, it's a completely unique.
Yeah, I mean, even Homo erectus, the hypothetical ancestor for these guys, doesn't have 3 roots on their lower bicuspid, right? So I don't know where that's coming from, and it's huge, and it doesn't make any sense to me at all why that would be. So I don't know.
How interesting.
But it's not Homo sapiens.
Right. And you can, like, are at this point with the data you have, could you even posit a hypothesis as to why, or even speculate casually, or it's just there's not enough information?
I would just say, so there's 4 different forces of evolution. There's natural selection, which everybody knows about. And then there's mutation. Of course, we're all familiar with mutation. There's gene flow. So when populations that are very different merge together, right? Europeans colonizing the Americas, that's gene flow between different populations. And then there's genetic drift. And genetic drift is just when, I don't know, shit happens, right? For no real reason, just by chance. So that's all I can come up with, is that the ancestors of these guys for some reason had this strange morphology. For some reason, meaning just by chance, right, had this strange morphology. And so because they're isolated on an island, then it increased in because all 3 individuals that have teeth have this weird premolar. So it's not pathological for that particular individual.
So interesting.
So when we can't explain something, we just say it's genetic drift.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense.
Shit happens. So I don't know.
I mean, if you don't have other data to support some type of other theory.
I don't know. And I mean, as far as the very small, for this very simplified molars that look like Homo sapiens, like you could speculate that when you make teeth smaller, that you lose cusps, so that they have 4 cusps instead of 5, and you really don't see that you don't even see that in many modern human groups. It's actually really it's quite simplified, very strange. So interesting. Yeah.
Everyone's talking about giants, and we have hobbits, right? Like that is so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Is there any precedent? I know people always talk about giants, and especially on like fringe internet circles, people want to discuss giants.
No, I was interviewed for one of these shows, and I tried to tell them they weren't giants, and they just don't listen to me.
And what is the data that they're pulling from? They're finding like large Homo, like human species?
No, they don't have any. They don't have any bones.
They don't find like a femur and be like, this is weird.
No. So the people who In Search of Lost Giants, I think, was a show that I agreed to interview for. They were coming up with these. It was actually interesting. So there were these reports in newspapers of finding skeletons with 2 rows of teeth. That's what they were coming to me for about. Can this happen? And I'm like, not really. But I mean, sometimes you get extra teeth. If you get extra teeth, they're usually in here, or maybe you get a 4th molar, like behind your wisdom tooth. But there's
typically just a pathology, though.
It would be pathological. Yeah, and runs in families, but pretty rare. And there's no fossils out there with 2 rows of teeth, even though you can find like somebody reported in the 1800s. But what's interesting is if you track this, it like the reports start here. I don't know. I'm saying here, like maybe in California somewhere. And then next thing you know, like, oh, somebody's found the same thing in Nevada. And then a year later, do you know what I mean? So it seems like somebody heard about like that could mean that it's a giant, and then they're finding them. But there's no pictures of them. There's no
You've never
fossils.
Actually looked at a dental record of something like this?
No.
Or
there's nothing else. I'm sorry. I know people want there to be giants, but there's
hilarious. So
there's no Bigfoot either. Sorry.
Now you're annoying me. Now I'm annoyed. Now I'm fully pissed off. Okay. As a kid, I wanted to believe in like cryptids. I thought it was the most fun thing.
Who doesn't? No, my colleague who's a geneticist he did the whole $1 million Bigfoot bounty. They were going to give people $1 million to go out and find evidence of Bigfoot. Nobody found any evidence of it. Everything they found was like a bear or a dog or a fox or a whatever.
What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick from this amazing conversation, because you might have a bad habit. And it's this specific bad habit that we're all thinking, okay? No, not that one, the other one. You know the one where you've had a couple drinks, you're at the bar, hanging out with your boys. All of a sudden, someone pops out a box of those honey sticks. Someone pops out a electronic death whistle, a little, you know what I'm talking about, a little binky, a little brain binky. You know what I mean? You're drinking, you just want to puff on something. That's a bad habit. That's what I would call a bad habit, because those products, as we know, could harm your lungs, could harm your mind, could harm your spirit. And that's why I want to talk to you about Fume. Fume is an award-winning product that I love for a few reasons. One, first off, it's got a nice feel to it. It gets you going. Yeah, you touch the Fume. Here's a picture of it right here. You touch the Fume, it's smooth, it clicks. I have a neurotic little brain. I might have HGTV. I don't know what I have. But if you spin this little Fume, it makes you feel great. I'm telling you, I like to fidget with stuff. I like to have a fidget spinner, but people judge you when you have a fidget spinner. But when you have a Fume in your pocket, you have a secret fidget spinner. Yeah, you can fidget with this thing all day. The main reason I love Fume, not only for its sleek and beautiful fidgeting abilities, the other reason I love Fume is because it is breathing flavored air. That's right. It does all the habitual fixations that I love about the late night puff, but it's not. It is the breath. It is the breath of mint. That's the one I love the most. I love breathing in the flavored air, mint packet. That is my favorite thing. I'm telling you, late at night, you're hanging out. I'm taking the bad out of the habit. I still have the habit. It's perfect, but now it's not a bad habit. It is a habit. It's a lot better for my health. I love Fume because instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. If you know me, I don't like putting artificial stuff inside my body. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. That's right. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural, delicious flavors. Stopping a bad habit is something that all of us put off. You're not alone. A lot of people put off stopping the bad habit because it is extremely difficult to do, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you as well. So, if you want to join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits, here's what I want you to do, all right? I've already done it. I want you to join me. I want you to go to tryfume.com. That's T-R-Y, Fume, F-U-M.com. And I want you to get the Journey Pack. The Journey Pack is going to give you everything you need to start on your journey from separating the bad from your habits. Just have a habit. Late at night, a couple drinks, breathe some flavored air. I'm telling you, it'll make you relax, it'll make you feel good, and it's fun to fidget with. So if you want to try it, the Journey Pack is the one to go with. And here's what I'm going to do for you. If you use the promo code Gagnon, that's Gagnon, you can save 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. That's right. So go to Tryfume, Tryfum.com, and use the code Gagnon, Gagnon, and save an additional 10% off your order today. Head to tryfume.com/Gagnon, Gagnon. Use the promo code. This will help you kick those bad habits and just turn them into habits. Well, let's get back to the show.
It's interesting that there is such an obsession with Bigfoot. This idea,
giants, or
well, giants, I guess, like is interesting to me in the way that the Florenzian. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Florenzian.
Florenziensis?
Florenziensis, yeah, Florenziensis.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the way that the Florenziensis is interesting to me, where it's like, oh, there's this substrata of human existence that
that we have evidence of.
And
it's cool.
Yeah, exactly. Like if there was evidence of like a large human subspecies or something, that would be interesting.
Right.
Unfortunately, there is no evidence yet. Maybe one day, who knows?
Maybe it will be.
But the idea of a Bigfoot is just like maybe there's a large ape out there, a singular one. It just seems crazy that we wouldn't have more, like that there wouldn't be like some type of like record or, you know, other types of like circumstantial evidence.
Right.
Just seems
apes
bizarre.
aren't solitary.
Right.
Right. So no primate lives by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's got to be more than one.
Yes.
Okay. So let's say you have a couple, right? Which would be odd because most primates are not monogamous, especially large-bodied primates.
Interesting.
So you'd have to have then a group, right? And even if you had, let's say they were monogamous. Let's say you had male and female and their offspring. What is there? Just male and female? Is that how many there have been for 50 years? Like where's the rest of them? How are they mating? Or they can't? That's incest. You can't do that. You have to have another group to mate with to have a viable population. I mean, like all these things. Like if people were sorry, I get off on a whole thing, but if people were taught proper science, they would know that it just does not make any sense, because you have to have a certain number of individuals to have a population, a viable living population. And if you have that many individuals, you would find them.
Yeah.
You just would. I'm sorry.
That's kind of how I feel. I'm like,
you just would.
I think it's a fun thing. The best theory I've heard is with Bigfoot is that there's actually a magic to it, where as the Bigfoot dies, it goes into an alternate reality. Its body and bones don't exist on our planet anymore. And I'm like, at least that
would be cool.
That would make sense.
So cool.
It makes sense that there's no evidence of like fossil record, bones, anything to like point to this ape. But unfortunately, I don't know if that's true.
It would be awesome if they were magic.
Right? That's what I'm saying.
I'd like to be magic.
Yeah, that'd be way more fun. I'm curious, just even going before Homo sapiens, my understanding of like sort of very broad scale, human evolution, just from like random sort of pop science books and like college and high school evolution classes, is that basically there's this Big Bang. There is now this like primordial soup, I've heard it be called, where you have sort of like amino acids sort of bouncing together. And just stop me when I say something stupid, okay? Amino acids kind of bouncing together in some type of like pool of something going on Earth, and then that's able to sprout like a single-celled organism that can sprout, 2 cells, and then eventually form some type of, swimming amoeba thing in the water that then slowly evolves into like a fish, and then the fish eventually can go onto land, and then from land, now it's sprouting legs and become like a small, little land critter. And then eventually this gets us to like some type of like bipedal ape that then forms our common ancestor. Is that generally the accepted case? Is there a major step in that that's still like disputed? Is my understanding of it completely false?
Well, it's simplified because, of course, there was lots of stuff going on, and there may have been one particular group that developed like certain. It's like the way you describe it is often how it's described, but it also makes it sound very progressive and like there's an end point.
As we know, it's not linear.
And we know it's not linear, but we also know that there's. So out of the let's say multicellular organism, or let's say out of the single cellular organism pool of lots of different critters, one group, evolved out to be multicellular. But there's lots of other single cellular organisms that are still around that have a long history that are pretty freaking well adapted because they've been around for a long, long time, right? So better adapted than us. We've only been around for 300,000 years.
Oh, how interesting.
Right? And so, and sharks, sharks are pretty much unchanged for like 200 million years or something, or 150 million years, I can't remember. But, you go back and look at sharks in the fossil record, they look like sharks. So,
how fascinating. I've heard this about alligators as well.
Alligators, right? So we tend to, I just get kind of, yes, eventually, like if you're just looking at our ancestry as humans, yes, you go back and you have to have single cell before you have multi-cells, and then you have to have swimming organisms before you have the lungfish that had, the fins, the lobe-finned fishes, that then had, this kind of the skeletal structure that allowed them to come up out of the out of the water occasionally, right? And then, but then some mammals went back to the water, right? The ancestors of whales and dolphins, they were land mammals and they went back to the water, and they still have pelvies if you look at their skeletons, right? So they, it's not like this is the goal, right? Because dolphins and whales are a really good example. So they were land mammals with 4 legs, and their ancestors, were land mammals that eventually started exploiting the water, and stuff happens, and those that had mutations that allowed them to swim better, and have more, because if you look at a whale fin, it's got 5 fingers.
How fascinating.
Right?
That is the most interesting thing in the world.
And they have pelvies, right?
Yeah.
Even though they don't have, arm, whatever, like arms and legs like us. So anyway, sorry, I go off on a tangent, but that's because I really fight against this idea that that evolution ends in us, and like somehow we're like perfected and we're so highly evolved And the fact of the matter is, we haven't been here that long, and we probably won't be here that much longer in the grand scheme of thing, I would imagine, because we're just using up our resources. And, so anyway.
And the sharks will still be here.
And the cockroaches.
Yeah. Do cockroaches show up a lot in the fossil records?
Oh, yeah. And dragonflies, 500 million years ago, look the same.
The exact same?
Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe a little bigger.
That is just so interesting. And
we're like, we're so special. I'm like, yeah, that big brain of yours, we're in big trouble.
That is a good way to think about it. I'm completely, I've fallen into the thinking of like, yes, human beings being the apex predator, this is the ultimate end of evolution, and this is what every animal wishes they were us. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I have a Homo Sapiens supremacy.
Yeah.
That might not be the case.
It's very,
Humans are probably less adapted than...
It's speciest.
Yeah, it is speciest. It really is. But yeah, that's a really interesting thing, that alligators, sharks, cockroaches, dragonflies, more adaptable than us, have stood a longer...
more perfected to their environment because they haven't changed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Or, and they probably are. I mean, humans are very adaptable. Don't get me wrong. You know, if we use up our Earth, then, you got Elon Musk who wants to have a colony on Mars, right? And so maybe some people will go there, and maybe the species will continue. So, like on my good days, I'll be like, oh yeah, we'll always come up with something and we'll continue. But, on my bad days, I'm just like, yeah, we're just kind of doomed because we've reached the carrying capacity for the Earth. I mean, we're beyond it. So it's
right.
We do have to. But the thing is that we're nothing if not imaginative and creative and problem-solving creatures and extremely adaptable, right? I mean, humans live all over the world. Humans can live underwater. Humans can live on the moon. Right. So we have culture that allows us to do that.
That is unique. Are there any other species on Earth that is as varied in habitat than Homo sapiens? Maybe cockroaches can live in the Antarctic? I don't know if they can.
No, I don't think so. No, I don't know, actually.
We're pretty good at that.
I mean, we can live in the
desert.
I think we're definitely the most adaptable because we have culture, because we can throw on coats, we can put on air conditioning. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's not, I mean, before clothing, people weren't living above a certain latitude, right? We have clothing. That's culture. I mean, of course you have to have the intelligence, but not just the intelligence, but the manipulative abilities and,
the dexterity to weave fabric and
or
things
use
like
a needle and thread or stuff like that.
Dolphins might have the idea for clothes.
Yeah, they might. They're super smart. Right? What are those orcas that are like tipping over sailing ships, right?
You've seen that? How wild.
I was hearing like that some of them were wearing salmons as hat for a while. Like there's this whole, I don't know if it's real, but it was on NPR, so I believe them.
This is a great theory. I love that.
I don't know, so it's like they're super smart, but they just aren't, destroying the world the way we are.
Right.
or manipulating the world in the way we do to cater to.
But maybe they just
needs.
don't have the capacity to destroy the world in the way
well,
that we
do. They're not primates. I mean, we are, lucky in that we are primates, right? We evolved from ancestors that have all primates have opposable thumbs. This is a really old characteristic. It's not something that's new to us, but because we're primates, we have this. And we were able to shorten our fingers and so that we can do this very precisely, right? If you can't do this, like I remember once a student was like, why can't dogs make fire if they're so smart? I'm like, they don't have these. We can't.
Yeah.
How are they going to do it?
It's so interesting. And I mean, what if the story of human evolution became that our consciousness that we have now took shape in some other type of species that didn't have this? How different would that be? And what if that's happened before?
What about octopuses? Octopi, they're super smart, right?
That's so crazy.
And they have like alien DNA, I've read. So they're like really, I'm exaggerating, but they have really different DNA, and they're super, super smart. They're just not manipulating the world and because they might not have
podcasts.
So.
Because they might not have the physical form to do so.
Well, they don't have to. We don't need
to. Well, I guess we don't need to either, but we have the ability to exploit.
Yeah.
Just based off of our motor skills, our dexterity, coupled with the cognition.
Right.
Whereas what if there are other species that have the cognition but don't have the other capabilities? Right. And so they're just bound by their actual physicality to not be able to do what we could do.
But they're perfectly happy.
Oh, yeah,
Maybe
of course.
happier.
Oh yeah, we'd probably be happier if we kind of like scale back a little.
That's the thing, is that when people ask me, you had mentioned something about big brains, right? And the thing is that big brains are great for us, but if you're an alligator and all you need to do is snap something, you don't need to invest energy into a metabolically expensive organ.
Yeah, it's very resource dense. It requires a lot.
Right. So there's just no reason to. And if there's no selection going on to increase the size of the brain, then it's not going to happen. Do you know what I mean? It's so for us, we see a correlation with increase in brain size and cultural things like stone tools and hunting, or let's say meat eating. And so it's not like everybody accepts this hypothesis, but there's a hypothesis that when we started eating protein-rich foods, our guts were able to shrink. So our guts are very metabolically expensive too. So compared to other apes, we have smaller guts. So if your gut shrinks, that means you can now allocate energy to other things. And then there's this feedback loop, right? So if your brain gets bigger, and if that, I don't know if necessarily that it does, but there seems to be a correlation between brain size and cultural abilities. So if that then allows you to manipulate your environment more, then right? So then it's going to be selected for, right?
Wow.
And selected for thinking about ways to increase the amount of protein you can have in your diet, or how to get it, and do you know what I mean? Instead of just eating it when you come upon it,
and it becomes
maybe
a flywheel.
you go hunting, or maybe you figure out new ways to hunt, or maybe now you're hunting fish and small game instead of just big game, or now you can do it from a distance, right? Neanderthals hunted close up and personal. They got injured all the time. Every single Neanderthal out there has a healed broken bone. So Homo sapiens evolved long distance weaponry. That's much better when you're trying to hunt something that will kill you. So, right. So anyway, so then there's this feedback loop, I think, that's going on. Again, it's all hypothetical, and not everybody, or I should say, there is some evidence that doesn't support this kind of expensive tissue hypothesis, but
expensive tissue hypothesis.
Yeah, because the brain and the gut are very metabolically expensive. You can't have big both. So
that is so fascinating.
To get the big brain, you have to shrink the gut.
Right. That is so fascinating. And then as you're getting more protein, you're able to put more resources to the brain,
right,
which then helps you get more protein, which
right,
then puts more resources to
right,
the brain, and that's the flywheel.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So, I mean, it's a hypothesis.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
So, who knows?
Yeah, we'll maybe never know. But that is fascinating. It does kind of make sense to me. But that is really, really interesting. Now, as far as, speaking of octopus, by the way, octopi, apparently, I don't know if this is true. I'm curious what you think. I've heard that octopi have... Yeah, this is getting wild. We're going to bleep that, okay? I think you just said a profanity.
I don't know. I just
you said
came
something
out.
very profane. I've read that octopi have some type of base level self-awareness in the way that Homo sapiens have it. And then I've heard that they've done studies where they're able to show them themselves in a mirror.
Right.
And then
they put a dot and
I've heard this.
I don't know about that. Possibly.
I mean, how fascinating.
I don't know. I like the way they taste, so I really don't want to know how smart they are.
That's actually, I have a weird line with this. I do.
You don't eat the octopus?
I have a very hard time eating animals that I feel like are intelligent. I can eat chickens. I don't think they're that smart.
No.
And I don't really feel anything that's bad about it. Cows are cute, but I don't think they're smart either.
Yeah.
Octopi, dolphins, it starts to get a little tricky.
I wouldn't be able to eat a dolphin.
A primate?
Sure. Oh yeah, no, I wouldn't either. But people do, but yeah.
I know.
But that feels cannibalistic.
And there's nothing, I guess, it doesn't cross like the ethical line is Homo sapiens. You can't eat those.
Right.
But everything before it, it's kind of your own personal line. It's that part is so interesting to me. Now, from this sort of story of evolution coming from, a big bang, some type of cataclysmic event.
Went off on a tangent.
We're back. Do we still possess, I've heard conflicting sort of reports on this, do we still possess vestigial organs from our time, either as, tree dwellers, as, and obviously not that we were tree dwellers, but from a common ancestor, anything like that, any type of sort of something physiological that would date us back to a pre-Homo sapien time period that we don't use now.
That we don't use?
Yeah. I've heard things like the coccyx would be a tail.
There's really no nerves going to the coccyx. You know that it's. I mean, it's not really a tail. I mean, they call it the tailbone, but it's not really a tail. I don't know. You know, there's people that are. I can't think of any. It's also not something I really study. You know, I can say there are like people who are sometimes born with a tail, but I don't know that that's actually vestigial at all. Do you know what I mean? Like, so there would, it's just like something that happens. It's not, you wouldn't call it like primitive or vestigial. Do you know what I mean? So, and yeah, I don't know. People talk about, I feel like I looked this up once because somebody asked me this question in class, and I feel like I couldn't come up with anything that was actually interesting.
Interesting.
You know?
Yeah. That seems significant to me. That there's...
I mean, we have primitive traits. I mean, you know, this is a primitive trait. Fingernails, right? All primates have fingernails, right? So this is a primitive trait. The fact that we, you know, but the thing is we use them all. Like our mobile, like why do we have mobile shoulder joints? Because we used to hang out in, you know, we used to be suspensory or climbing, right? Now we use it to throw a frisbee or play baseball or, you know, shoot somebody in the finger. I don't know. But, you know, this is a primitive characteristic. You know, like if you were to make a human from scratch, you wouldn't necessarily give us a mobile shoulder joint, right? And, you know, one of the consequences of our, you know, bipedalism is that humans are fairly unique. And I think there might be some birds that also get this, but in that we get these fractures in our back. It's called spondylolysis or spondylolisthesis, as slippage of a break and then slippage. And you only see that in bipedal animals, right? And we have back problems. You could argue that all that's from sitting too much, et cetera, et cetera. But there are like unique consequences to the way we evolved bipedalism, right? So if you were a deity, let's say a great designer, and you were to design humans from scratch, why would you make them look like apes?
Right.
Right. We're not terribly. This isn't like the only way you can make a human walk on two legs. And in fact, if you look at robots, right, that aren't being made, like that are being made in Japan, but not the ones that are being made to like serve you, so they look very human-like. They are put together in a different way.
Right. Sometimes their knees go the other way, like an ostrich.
Exactly.
Things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So,
yeah, for me, I don't know. Like I said, I was raised religious, but I never was like sort of bound. And again, this might be out of your purview, but I was never bound to a like strict, literal creation story. And rather, I don't really necessarily see a conflict between, you know, science and a creation story at large if you're willing to accept the metaphorical nature of a creation story. To me, I don't know. I don't know if you have colleagues or even you yourself have like some type of, again, this is probably branching more into like religious philosophy, but when it comes to creation stories, to say, okay, there was a big bang and that is let there be light, sure. And then there's animals that are roaming the earth, that is, you know, early evolution. And then, you know, God made Adam and Eve, and that is Homo sapiens.
Right.
I don't see an issue with that as a metaphorical tale if there is some type of like higher power. I don't see that as a conflict. Within your work or colleagues you've spoken with, is this something that's accepted within the anthropological field, or is it not really discussed?
What we try to tell people is that it's a false debate, right? So creation versus evolution is a false debate. There are certain realms. Evolution is in the science realm. We test it using scientific methods. Religion is in a different realm. Science can't tell us how to treat people. Science can't tell us what's moral. Science can't tell us, right? You can't do that with science. That's what religion and culture is for.
Right.
So they're very different things. Do you know what I mean? So I wouldn't try to use science to explain morality, and I wouldn't use religious beliefs to try to explain science. So that's how I would say it. And I tell my students there's no reason for you to give up your religious beliefs to accept that humans evolved from a common ancestor with apes, to accept the scientific evidence for evolution. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I don't care if you think some deity started it. I don't care. I actually really don't care because I can't test it. So I don't care.
Yeah.
If I can't test it, I mean, I say that kind of flippantly, but as a scientist, I don't think about it. Do you know what I mean? So whatever, I don't, you know what I mean? But the thing is that the creation myth that you just described is a Judeo-Christian creation myth, right? Other people have, different creation myths, right? Yanomamo came from fierce people, like they're fierce because the gods fought and one with blood and the blood fell to the earth and that created humans, and that's why the Yanomamo are fierce people in their belief system, right? So who's to say they're not right?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So that's also, and unfortunately, it's not. I would love to teach all that in a comparative religion class, but it's not something that you can actually spend a whole lot of time on in a science class.
Right. Before it just ventures into broad speculation and sort of philosophical debate.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's all sorts of creation myths. I don't think there's any reason to believe that one is more accurate than any other.
Right.
And it's outside the realm of science, which isn't what we're doing when we're teaching evolution in a science class.
Sure. So. And perhaps they're all trying to describe the same story. And maybe that story has a greater, higher power, or maybe it doesn't. It's just human beings' way of trying to put a story to something. And that, again, it's not really testable. Right.
It's humans trying to explain the way they are, right? So... yeah, I mean, you could argue that, the Old Testament is a way to justify why men are superior to women and why we can, we can kill animals whenever we want because God made them for us, right? So that is a creation myth that justifies the way humans were living at the time in that area of the world, right? So for the Aleuts who have Sedna, well, they are sea people because Sedna's father took her out to the waters and threw her overboard, and she grabbed on to hold on, and he cut her fingers off, and they became all the mammals in the sea that they eat, right? So our creation myths describe what our particular culture describe or validate, cultural beliefs and the way we see ourselves and why we do what we do.
Interesting.
So.
What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick from this amazing conversation with the anthropologist, Dr. Bailey. Because Dr. Bailey, obviously, as you can tell, is extremely well-researched, has done a lot of work uncovering the origins of humankind. And what I've gathered from this conversation so far is that trying to figure out where human beings came from, the origin of our entire species with a very limited fossil record, that's extremely hard. But submitting an injury claim with Morgan & Morgan is easy. If you haven't heard yet, you're about to. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. That's right. Over 100 offices nationwide and more than 800 attorneys. Morgan & Morgan could be right for you. And here's why. A couple of reasons. I like Morgan & Morgan because never in human history has it been easier to submit a claim through Morgan & Morgan. Here's what I love about Morgan & Morgan, okay? You can submit a claim in like 8 clicks or less. It's like buying something on Amazon or buying something on Uber Eats or something like that. It's never been easier. It's not like the traditional way of trying to find an attorney, going through a phone book, Googling a bunch of names, attorney in my area, reading through a bunch of sketchy reviews. Is this guy going to rip me off? Is he good? Is he bad? You have no idea. But with Morgan & Morgan, it's very simple. They are trusted nationwide. It's never been easier to submit a claim. And here's the craziest part. Their fee is free unless they win your case. That's right. You don't pay any money, $0. How's that sound? $0 unless they win your case. Their incentive is to help you get fair compensation for your claim. So if you're ever injured, you can go to Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople, forthepeople.com/Gagnon, Gagnon, or dial #law. That's #529 from your cell phone. That's forthepeople, forthepeople.com/Gagnon, Gagnon, or dial #law from your cell phone. This is a paid advertisement. If you are interested in submitting a claim very easily to a trusted attorney, attorneys nationwide, you could check out Morgan & Morgan. Now let's get back to the show.
I do want to circle back to the culture conversation as it relates to Homo sapiens specifically. Obviously, there are, it seems to me, at least just from like my very like tertiary research, that as hunter-gatherers, the way that the society was sort of structured, again, maybe this varies across the world, across different Homo sapiens. Maybe Neanderthals obviously were hunter-gatherers as well, and maybe the way they set things up was different. So I'm curious what your research has shown for this. But just as far as the way that they set up their societies, is to me, I understand men would go and hunt, they'd run around, they'd find gazelles, they go away for 2 weeks at a time, and then they come back with some type of animal, they'd bring it back to the group, everyone would eat. Women were taking care of the children, and they would stay home and sort of like keep the home, raise younger men that could go hunt, raise women that could have more children. And that was sort of the way that these like small hunter-gatherer societies were functioning within Homo sapiens. I don't know about any other human species. How true is that story, and is there a lot of debate with that?
There's really no evidence for that.
Interesting.
So Neanderthal males and females, there's differences in size, but in terms of muscular, in terms of robusticity that reflect muscle groups and stuff like that, females probably were doing similar things to what males were doing. Ethnographically, if you look at living human groups, most of the food that is provided by females. And there was actually just like last week, I think, in the Sigma Xi, which is some national science group. Anyway, there was a study showing that, in fact, women hunt a lot more than people think. And so this is the kind of man the hunter hypothesis that was thrown out back in the like late 70s, 1980s that just won't go away, even though people have shown over and over again that it's females that are providing most of the sustenance in any particular group. And although when you're talking about big game hunting, that is usually in the realm of males often. So in some groups there's persistence hunting. So they, and this is where like humans are actually unique in our ability to endurance run, to run long distances, or jog, right? And so the men will go out and track and then track and chase down like a kudu in the middle of the day, and then the kudu's like, and then they stab it. But that, then they might bring it back, but there's a whole social thing going on there. It's less about providing for the group. Some groups food share, some don't as much. Do you know what I mean? Then like being some kind of I don't know. I want to say rite of passage, but it's more about status, social status, and things like that than it is about actually providing for the group. So females actually do most of that.
Interesting. And what is the evidence that shows that theory, that women were gathering things, or they were just straight up hunting different animals?
They're probably hunting small game. So I mean, just think about how, if you think of, I don't know, it's like in the media, or when you see drawings of early humans making stone tools, right? Who is it? Who's making the stone tools? Is it men or is it women?
I don't know.
It's usually men, right? That's the way they portray them, right?
Okay, I thought you were
the thing is that, no, I wasn't. No, but the thing is that, no, those are like artist renditions. This is what we grow up with culturally.
That's why I believe it.
Right? But the thing is that when you look at chimpanzees, so there are some chimpanzee groups who we share a common ancestor with, right? We did not evolve from chimpanzees, right? We share a common ancestor with them. We share a lot of DNA with them, but there are some, not all, some chimpanzee groups where they make tools, right? They use branches to crack open nuts. It's the females that do that, not the males.
Interesting. And they're making the tools as well.
Yeah. So tools, right? So, or the termite fishing, right? So you modify a stick, you stick it in, termites come out, you eat it. Mm-hmm. Females are the ones doing it. Females are the ones teaching, demonstrating, whatever, there'd be debate about that, to the offspring, but the offspring learn it from their moms in some way, right? So,
and what are the male chimps doing in these specific groups?
well, I don't remember, because there are different ones. There's one in the Thai forest. There's ones over here, and so I don't remember exactly, but there are some chimpanzee groups where they hunt colobus monkeys, and it usually is the males that do that. But it's in some groups, it's like whoever gets the colobus monkey eats it. And in other groups, sometimes they might share, but usually it's with a female they want to bag later on, or something like that.
Hilarious.
So that curry favor from in some way or another.
Interesting. So it's not like a great communal effort. It's typically a self-serving endeavor.
It's different in different chimpanzee groups, which is actually fascinating because that suggests that it's not something that's genetic, right? It's something that's learned or kind of cultural, maybe some people would say. So in some chimpanzee groups, whoever gets it eats it, and in other chimpanzee groups, it's more of a group effort. So some will do the chasing, and then the colobus monkey, they chase them up this tree, and then it goes over here, and then one of the other ones snaps it up. Do you know what I mean? And then might share it with other groups. So, but
so
other members. So, but it's different in different groups. So, but my point is that it's the females that are making the tools. Right. So just to kind of come back full circle, we have this stereotype of females just taking care of offspring when in fact, probably the earliest tool makers were females, right? And probably the earliest artists were probably females too. Do you know what I mean? And females provide more food in living human, ethnographically in living human hunter-gatherer groups. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it's the females that are providing most of the calories for the group.
And why would men, or like the males in these groups, spend all that time and energy and exert all of those resources to go get something that might only provide, 30% of the communal food?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that and then a lot of times they're not very successful. I mean, a lot of times they're not successful at all when they go out. So I don't know, it's again, it could be about social status, I don't know, because I'm not an ethnographer, so I don't want to like venture down in that, because I actually then I get just into making shit up, and I don't want to make stuff up, so I don't know.
Sure.
But I can say, because I was really interested in the study that came out last week that was in the Sigma Psi newsletter that was like, it was just found that females hunt just as much as males in certain ethnographic. They're just hunting rabbits or birds, or you know what I mean? They're not necessarily hunting the big game.
Right. And then as far as child rearing, is it hypothesized that some men were actually taking on greater roles with taking care of children?
They didn't talk about that in that particular article. I think for practical reasons, children are going to stay close to their mothers because mothers lactate and males don't, right? So males can't. I'm sorry, but you're limited. You know what I mean?
I could do my best.
If there's a baby with you and you don't have any breast milk, the baby's going to die.
Yeah.
Right. So there are limitations, that keep females close to their offspring, at least for some amount of years. You know what I mean?
So perhaps they were doing both, or were there societies potentially set up differently that it was older people watching the children, like watching children is more of like a communal effort?
It's hard to know, because there's a danger of using ethnographic analogy that's looking at living hunter-gatherers and assuming that they represent Paleolithic people, which they don't, because the world was different back then, right? I mean, Neanderthals lived in cold ice ages, and you know what I mean? Like, why would we even think that they would be living the same way as somebody in southern Africa? Right? I mean, why would we think that? Or even Homo Sapiens at 18,000 years ago, freaking cold snap. It's very, very cold. Like, why would we even think that they're living like, even like Inuits who are, living in the Arctic Circle, but are marine people. Do you know what I mean? Like, so there's no, it's something we constantly have to kind of fight against. Because it's very hard we assume that humans in the past had to be like something that is existing today, but it might be that they lived in a completely different way. Do you know what I mean? Maybe men took care of babies and and all the food they had. I don't know. There are primates where males that take part in childcare more than other primates, and there's some primates where they just ignore them, and they, so it's there's no there's no one way, and I think that. Again, we're constantly trying to look at things that are living today and say, well, the ancient humans would have been like that, but the world was a completely different place back then.
Right. What might have been available to them in terms of big game to hunt might have been completely different. Like their need to necessarily go out. Maybe everyone was gathering. Maybe there was no hunting really. Yeah. It's difficult to necessarily say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I sort of have a general feeling, again, just from my very surface research, geography has played such a massive role in the story of human evolution. And I've heard different things get broken down in this way, so tell me if this is untrue. But I've heard this idea that the ability just to have domesticatable animals was extremely advantageous for Homo sapiens in more recent history, and I guess approaching modernity, that just having animals you could domesticate that could create milk, that you could farm, that you could keep in a close proximity, that they could reproduce relatively quickly, was so advantageous both for agriculture, for building societies, for building larger societies, like passing beyond Dunbar's number and things like that, even creating immune defense against diseases because you're living in closer proximity to animals. I'm curious what you have seen in that effect, that just Europeans living around animals like sheep that could be, farmed and sort of domesticated was a major advantage against a lot of people in the world that didn't necessarily have access to domesticatable animals.
There's a lot going on in that.
Yeah, tell me what's
stupid.
So,
well, the thing is that, again, it's kind of like getting back to the whole, should everybody have a big brain? Do you know what I mean? Should everybody domesticate animals because it worked in the Fertile Crescent to settle down and grow food and domesticate animals? Is that really a good thing? I mean, we don't ever question that. There are people like Jared Diamond who wrote, a whole book on why that's not the case, and why farming is the worst mistake in the history of the human race, he would argue. Right. So I don't actually really know how to answer that, because the question is kind of imbued with this it's a good thing, whereas I don't know that I would agree that being exposed to, having chicken pox and monkey pox and cow pox and all these things that we get from animals is a good thing, right? It wipes out lots of people. Bubonic plague, you get that from, right? So all these things that we get from association with animals, not so good for our population.
Right.
Whereas people who live in less crowded situations, they have parasites, but they don't have bubonic plague or any of these poxes or whatever that we get from animals, and they also don't have heart disease and diabetes, and do you know what I mean? So there's this trade-off. It's a big trade-off that when we commit to agriculture, we have to stay in one place. There's too many people. You get irritated with people, you get fights, there's people then that my land, not your, you have territorialism, then you get diseases, you can't get proper nutrition if you don't balance everything right. If you look at in the prehistory of Native Americans who switched to corn, eating maize predominantly, there's a period of time where they have to figure out that you can't just eat maize, even though it's really tasty, and they have anemia. It shows up in the bone. You have shitty teeth. You know what I mean? So I would argue that hunter-gatherer probably is a better way to go. Do you know what I mean?
That is so interesting.
Because what's so great about having more people? Honestly, it's. We're living beyond the carrying capacity of the earth. That's not a good thing. So people, I mean, we have this whole notion of progress and because humans are making more humans. And I guess you could argue that is, in the short term, very fit, because fitness is measured in terms of your reproductive success. So we're extremely fit until we outlive our resources. Do you know what I mean? So as a species, we don't actually know how good this is going to be. We haven't been around that long, and we've only been farming for 10,000 years. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do we really know that this experiment is as good as you say?
Wow. Do you think it's possible that there was early farmers even beyond that then stopped farming because there was an issue, or that their societies fell out, or anything to that effect? Is there any data to support that?
I don't know of any data that support that. It was the farming came about in a time when the earth was getting warmer. I mean, there were changes in the climate that actually made the Fertile Crescent, and there's a lot of different hypotheses about why people might have started farming, but not everybody did it. Not everybody because you can't farm rice anywhere or wheat anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, so in Africa, it's millet, and in East Asia, it was rice, and wheat in the Fertile Crescent. So I don't know. I don't know of any cases, but again, that's. After people start farming, I'm kind of out of here. They're like too young for me to really pay attention to, like the really old stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, the idea that farming is the greatest mistake. I remember reading Guns, Germs, and Steel, and that always kind of stuck out. I think that was where the book where he describes it.
I think he wrote another one too, but that was the big one for sure.
Yeah, and that always stuck out to me, is that could this be a mistake?
Right.
I mean, I guess it probably helps for building greater numbers. Like maybe it compresses the scale, maybe it brings up the floor of mortality, but also maybe lowers the ceiling. But would it not be true that agrarian societies have longer lifespans than hunter-gatherer societies, or is that a myth?
Well, I think what he argues is we're not agriculture, we're not agrarian societies, we're in an urban society. Like, so, you know what I mean? Like, what we think is being very successful, like going to the grocery store, we're not farmers, right? So if you really look at farmers, agriculturalists, you know what I mean? It's not such a great thing to be a farmer. Do you know what I mean? We forget that we actually aren't farmers.
Right.
Like, we go buy it in the store, right? So, I can't, it's been a while since I read the book, but your teeth go to hell in a handbasket. People get shorter. There's anemia. You're prone to, if you're doing monoculture, so you have one type of plant, and locusts come through. Like, if you're relying on plants and locusts come through, then you're kind of SOL. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Or if the fungus comes in and kills off all your potatoes, and all the potatoes are genetically identical or whatever, because domestication is a type of genetically modifying plants. So people who don't want to eat GMOs, well, you better stop eating pretty much everything that's domesticated, because it's all genetically modified. I don't know if that answers your question, or if I went off the rails.
No, absolutely. Okay, so the last thing I want to wrap up on is I just want to ask you about race. Race is fascinating to me because, as I understand it, it exists because it is humanly constructed. It is, Homo sapiens look a lot of different ways. There are white people, but then there's also Dutch and French, and there's a difference between them. And then there's also Africans and people who live in China, and we all look certain different ways. So I'm curious if you can sort of speak to the evolutionary nature of race as we understand it, and why sort of geography shapes that, and what the prevailing thought in that regard is.
Yeah, that's a whole lecture that I could do, but I can try to kind of summarize a little bit. I think maybe the main points, the most important points about, quote, race. There is no such thing as biological race, because nobody can agree on racial categories, right? So we can't agree on how many there are, basically, because what the categories that people use in the United States are different than some we would use in Brazil, right? Or somewhere else in the world. So there's no categories or number of categories or that people agree on. So that's one big problem. The other problem is that humans vary in a continuous way. So we might say, oh, you have really light skin, you're white, right? Or you're black. I don't like to use those terms because nobody's white, nobody's black, right? But you can say you have really fair skin and you have really dark skin. But the thing is there's something there everywhere in between. And people who have dark skin might live in Africa, they might live in India, they might live in Australia, they might live in Indonesia, and they might have exactly the same skin tone. Do you know what I mean? And people who have light skin might be from they're usually from, more, the farther you get away from the equator, the lighter your skin is, right? So people with light skin tend to be in the northern region. So you could be from Asia, do you know what I mean, across the whole, whatever, Russia, or you could be down in the southern hemisphere, right, farther. So where you have dark skin, it's all concentrated around the equator. And then as you move away from the equator, skin gets lighter, and that's related to vitamin D production and skin cancer, right? So if you're near the equator, dark skin protects you from skin cancer and from folate deficiency. As you move away from the equator, lighter skin is selected for so that you can get enough vitamin D through UV radiation, right? So that it synthesizes UV radiation, synthesizes vitamin D, which gives helps keep your bones strong, calcium, right, and stuff like that. So in that sense, there's just no way to break up, let's say, skin color into races. Right. And so the other thing about races is there's no set of character. There's no one character that you can only find in certain groups. Right. So within, let's say, Africa, which is the most of diversity, Africa has more variation than any other place in the world. And you have people with skinny noses and people with wide noses. You have people with lighter skin and people with darker skin. You have people with straight hair. You have people with curly hair. Right. So you have people who have something that looks like an epicanthic eye fold, which people typically tend to associate with people from Asia, but you can find that in Africa too. Right. So there's no set of characteristics that people can use to define any. First, we can't agree on how many there are. Then we can't agree on what characters define them. And so the question is, why do we even bother? Right? Why? Because humans like to categorize things, right? Yeah. And the thing is, I think an important point is to say that just because we would say there's no biological reality to race, that doesn't mean that race doesn't have real biological consequences. So because people continue to put other people in different racial categories, there's biological consequences related to stress of being stigmatized or being stereotyped or not having the access to the same resources or all of these things. So there's real biological consequences to the social construct of race. But in fact, there's no biology behind it.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating to me. I mean, even just looking at Africa, like I remember, like as a kid, first time I met like Ethiopians or Eritreans or people or Sudanese people.
Very narrow noses, right?
I mean, African, like in America, they would refer to themselves, or people refer to them as black, but don't necessarily look like people from West Africa, from Mali, from Nigeria.
Right.
And maybe some do, but again, there's so much variability even in that classification.
Right.
And so this American concept of, oh, you are black, you are white, just seems really unhelpful.
Right.
I guess maybe in a time, obviously, with like racial prejudice and chattel slavery and things like that, I get why these things were created as social paradigms, but especially in our current way that we look at things, it just seems unhelpful altogether.
It doesn't make sense to, and in fact, there are negative consequences to grouping people into categories that don't actually have any set boundaries, and that you can't, right? So they're like medically, like there's a condition called sickle cell anemia that is usually associated with Africans, right, or African Americans, and we have to remember that a lot of the Africans who are in the Americas were taken from West Africa. And so in America, we have a certain idea of what African looks like. But of course, if you go to Addis or Sudan, right, or like East Africa or even Southern Africa, you see that people actually look very different and they're incredibly diverse. Just as if you go to Southern Europe, they look very different from the Norwegians, right? So it's like even European is not all one thing. But I lost my train of thought. What I was going to say. What had you said?
the helpfulness of race in America, our Americans' understanding of racial politics.
Right. Okay. So I was going to say medically, there are the consequence. So sickle cell anemia is something usually associated with African Americans, but people who present as whatever European Americans, or I mean, anybody can have sickle cell mutation, right? But if you are, let's say, I went to a doctor with kind of symptoms that if I were African American, they'd be like, oh, we're going to test you for sickle cell anemia. They might not test that for me because I'm, quote, white. So when doctors make assumptions about what kind of diseases you might have because how you present, right? And this is a whole thing about training. We do a lot of, at NYU, we have a global public health program, and a lot of them are double majors with anthropology, and it's about learning about these kind of cultural constructs that are kind of the assumptions that the medical community make based on what they think somebody's background is.
Yeah, of course.
You know, and what kind of diseases they might have or not have. And you can make big mistakes and significant mistakes in diagnosing people, you know, based on what you think or the kind of assumptions you make. So there are really... Yeah. So, but on the other hand, I mean, I don't want to say that race is, because if people say there's no such thing as race, therefore we don't need equal opportunity and we don't need blah, 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 and all that stuff. And that's a completely different thing, because people are treated differently based on the way they look.
Yeah, of course.
And that has biological consequences. So racism is real. There's no biological reality to race. But racism is real, and there are biological consequences.
Racism is real, and those consequences are real because we created it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And now I'm curious, it's interesting that even just like skin pigmentation comes from geography, that being close to the equatorial line will change the pigmentation of your skin.
Well, it won't change it. It's just that certain skin pigmentation is selected for. Right. So
yeah, that's a more specific way to say it.
Yeah. Because I say that because somebody might think, oh, if I move to the equator, am I going to develop dark skin? No.
You might get a little tanner.
You might get tan.
I got a little tan going.
And we all have different abilities to keep to tan. So
of course.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious as far as I guess like ethnic variations or like visible physiological variations between like Asian people or even like Kazakh people, I've noticed having like different facial shapes. Is there a geographical reason why that would be selected for in those areas?
There are selective forces that act besides skin color, that act on body shape. So people from colder climates tend to be shorter and stockier. Because of thermoregulation. So if you increase body mass and reduce skin surface area, then you can retain warmth better, right? And so people near the equator generally, so there are exceptions, tend to have greater skin surface area and less body mass. So they have longer appendages. They tend to have long and lean rather than short and squat, right? So there are, that's Bergman's and Allen's rule, and it applies to all mammals, not just humans.
Interesting.
And skull shape seems to follow that too. So you have like more rounded skulls in colder climates and more surface area, more in relative to mass in warmer climates. Again, for the same reasons, to dissipate heat. So other things, the other kinds of...
Like a singular eyelid versus a double eyelid, is that a geographical feature that's selected for, or is that just a...
But that's one of these things that we don't know and would fall into. Remember I told you about the category where we're like, we don't know, so we say it's genetic drift.
Oh, interesting.
Or it could be sexual selection, right? Something that... So people contemplate, like, why do Neanderthals and Homo erectus have these big brow ridges? Maybe they were sexy. Do you know what I mean? There's actually nobody has come up with a functional reason to have big brow ridges like Neanderthal. I mean, Homo erectus, you could just set a beer can on them. I mean, they're so big, right?
Hey, we take that personally.
But I mean, so it could be that certain eye shapes were just attractive to people, and so they or some person that had a particular eye shape left more offspring. I don't know what Genghis Khan looked like, but you know what I mean? He's left his offspring all over the place.
Interesting.
Right? And so I think that there's that goes on as well. And then, until I mean, people have always been mixing, but, you know, in the peripheries of the world, you know, in peninsulas, let's say southern Spain, or in, you know, northern Europe, or way, way far east, you know, you have less chance to exchange genes with people who are far away, or you know, and you could also, if you're on an island, you might have isolation coming into play. And so there's all sorts of reasons that have no function whatsoever in terms of whether we have bigger lips or smaller lips, or what our eye shape looks like, or our brow ridge development. A lot of that is just, I would say, sexual selection or genetic drift, so just chance.
So fascinating.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well,
okay.
This has been so great. I really appreciate the time. Truly, this has been, I just had such a blast. This is awesome. I really appreciate it a lot.
I enjoyed it too. I like talking about this stuff. So thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. And next time you come back, we can talk more about art. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. The important things.
Right. Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.